The city groaned under a thunderstorm as neon lights flickered across the soaked pavement. A hooded figure moved fast through the alley, breath ragged. Jason said, "They found me." His words broke in the static-laced night. The glow of a laptop blinked red in the distance, warning of intrusion. The air reeked of betrayal. Miles, his only ally, yelled, "Jason, shut it down!" But Jason's fingers trembled as code danced across the screen. The storm cracked overhead like a warning from above. Sirens wailed closer, their echo mixing with his pounding heartbeat. His mentor, Cole, once trusted, had sold him out. Jason knew it. He felt it deep. Their enemy wasn't faceless anymore. It was someone inside the circle. Someone he had let close. The final firewall burned on screen. Jason whispered, "No turning back." With one keystroke, a vault of dark secrets spilled into the world as the power grid flickered. Somewhere far off, a scream cut through the storm. The city went dark. The blackout spread like a living thing, swallowing neighborhoods in silence. Jason ran through empty streets, heart hammering. Miles said, "You've crossed them now." Thunder cracked above as rain blurred his vision. Police drones buzzed overhead, their red beams scanning alleys. Jason slipped into an abandoned train station, breath ragged. The walls dripped with graffiti and secrets. Somewhere inside, a hidden server waited, his only chance to vanish before Cole's hunters closed in. Jason thought of the files he had unleashed, truths that would burn governments. Miles muttered, "They'll kill us for this." Jason said nothing. He knew the enemy was already moving. Betrayal had come from someone close, maybe Cole, maybe more. He shoved open a rusted door as the storm howled outside. Time was running out. The city held its breath, waiting for what came next. Inside the station, the server room glowed faintly in the dark, a heartbeat of blue LEDs. Jason approached warily. Miles said, "Cole knew about this place." Jason hesitated, eyes narrowing. He plugged in a drive, fingers tight with urgency. Data spilled onto screens, each file a loaded gun of secrets. Governments, corporations' names, all tied to crimes buried deep. Jason muttered, "They built empires on lies." Miles looked at him sharply. "And we just lit the fuse." The hum of machines filled the air, mingling with the storm outside. Somewhere distant, footsteps echoed. Someone else was here. Jason's grip tightened on the keyboard. The enemy had arrived faster than expected. Footsteps grew louder in the hallway. Jason yanked the drive free, shoving it into his jacket. Miles whispered, "Too late." "They're here." Lights flickered. The door creaked open as silhouettes appeared, armed, faceless, moving like ghosts. Jason's pulse roared in his ears. Cole's betrayal cut deep now, every shadow whispering his name. Jason darted behind old lockers as flashlights swept the room. Miles readied a metal pipe, knuckles white. Jason thought of the secrets on the drive. The world would burn if they got it. He clenched his jaw, ready for anything. The storm outside crashed like a war drum. The first shot rang out, deafening in the metal room. Sparks flew as bullets chewed walls. Jason sprinted toward a side door, Miles covering him with wild swings. Jason yelled, "Move!" They crashed into the hallway, breath ragged. Rain poured through shattered skylights, drenching everything. The attackers followed, boots pounding. Jason clutched the drive tight. He knew the files inside would change everything if he survived long enough to release them. Behind him, Miles shouted, "They won't stop." Lightning split the sky outside as they burst through an exit into the storm. The hunt had begun. The storm began to fade, leaving the city drenched and trembling. Jason and Miles slipped into a safe house hidden beneath a crumbling bookstore. The walls smelled of old paper and dust. Miles said, "You need rest." Jason ignored him, eyes fixed on the drive. He felt the weight of 1,000 lives trapped in the data, secrets too dangerous to keep, too deadly to expose. He remembered Cole's betrayal like a knife twisting in his chest. Jason whispered, He was supposed to protect us. Miles sat heavily in a chair, exhausted, staring at the boarded-up windows. Shadows stretched long across the floor. Jason wiped rainwater from his face, exhaustion etched deep into his eyes. The storm had passed outside, but inside, everything felt ready to explode. Jason finally collapsed into a battered armchair, his chest heaving. Miles paced like a caged animal. The rain above softened, leaving only the hum of the city outside. Miles muttered, "Cole played us from the start." Jason's jaw tightened. His mind drifted to the moment Cole smiled as everything burned. The betrayal cut deeper than the storm itself. Jason whispered, "We need to find him." His voice cracked with fatigue and anger. Miles slammed his fist into the table, rattling the empty cups. The safe house felt smaller with each breath, as though the walls knew danger was closing in. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. They both froze. The door creaked. A figure entered slowly, steps deliberate. It was Sarah, their contact inside the network, face hidden under a dripping hood. Jason rose instantly, muscles tense. Sarah said, "You're in deeper than you know." Her voice carried both warning and regret. She tossed a folder onto the table. Inside were photos of government officials, criminal syndicates, and Cole standing beside them all. Jason's stomach turned cold. Miles leaned forward, whispering, "He sold us to everyone." Sarah pulled her hood back, eyes dark with fear. She said, "There's a bounty on you both." Jason felt the weight of the world tightening like a noose. Sarah explained how Cole had orchestrated everything. The hacks, the leaks, even the betrayal inside their own circle. Jason listened, fists clenched. He had trusted Cole for years, believed in him like a father. Now the man was hunting him like prey. Sarah's voice shook as she said, "He has the entire city watching you." Jason felt heat rising in his chest. The files on his drive were their only weapon now. Miles asked, "What's his endgame?" Sarah's gaze fell to the floor. "Power," she said softly. Jason's pulse thundered in his ears. He knew what had to be done, but it meant facing Cole head-on. Jason grabbed the drive and stood tall, shoulders squared. He said, "We end this tonight." His voice was low, steady, dangerous. Miles nodded, a storm gathering behind his tired eyes. Sarah looked between them, fear flashing across her face. "You don't understand," she said. "Cole isn't alone. He has soldiers, mercenaries, and the entire network at his back." Jason slipped the drive into his jacket. "Then we burn it all," he replied. Lightning flickered faintly outside, as if the world itself braced for what was coming. The room fell silent, the decision made. There was no turning back now. Night pressed against the rooftops as the city limped under rolling blackouts. Jason mapped a route across antennas and vents, breath fogging in the cold. Miles said, "We hit Cole's relay, then vanish." Sarah scanned the skyline, eyes hard. The relay pulsed beneath them, a steel heart hiding in a telecom hub. Jason said, "Once we clone the logs, we prove he built this shadow state." Sirens murmured far below, a restless ocean of risk. Sarah said, "He'll burn the evidence if he senses us." Miles stripped a panel with a hiss of metal and rain. The relay's status lights flickered like taunting stars. Jason steadied trembling hands, remembering the people buried by these secrets. He said, "History doesn't forgive silence." Wind shoved them toward the edge as the hub door clicked open. They slipped into the hub, swallowed by humming air and cold glass. Racks towered like black cathedrals, cables braided into veins. Jason said, "Handshake spoof live." His code crawled through firewalls like smoke. Miles posted at the door, counting footfalls in the hall. Sarah said, "Thermal cams are blind for 2 minutes." The relay console bloomed with hidden routes and payments. Jason said, "Cole paid mercs through Shell satellites." A diagram unfurled, tying officials to black sites. Miles whispered, "This buries him." The building trembled as generators kicked. Sarah said, We've woken something. Jason cloned the logs, heart pounding like a metronome for truth. Footsteps converged like closing jaws. An elevator dinged and stilled. Jason said, "Almost done." Progress bars crept with cruel patience. Sarah scanned the feed, jaw set. She said, "Cole's men 2 floors up." Miles yanked a fire axe from a safety case. He said, "We need a new exit." Jason packed the clone drive and launched a purge that mimicked a power surge. The screen stuttered and bled to black. Sarah said, "Stairwell east is clear for 30 seconds." The door burst inward, boots skidding. Miles swung once, metal on armor, sparks arcing like meteors. Jason ran, feeling the truth thrum in his pocket like a detonator. They spilled into a maintenance tunnel, smelling of rust and wet concrete. Water dripped a steady countdown. Jason said, "We broadcast from the river node." Sarah shook her head, calculating. She said, "Cole mirrors nodes, he'll poison the feed." Miles limped, blood dark on his sleeve, but his stare burned steady. He said, "Then we jam the mirror and flood the truth." Jason opened a junction box and bridged a clandestine uplink. Code unfurled like a net over black water. Sarah said, "Mask the origin with old maritime beacons." Jason smiled despite the fear. He said, "Ghosts speaking to ghosts." Above them a train roared like a verdict. The river node sat beneath a skeletal bridge, wind tearing at cables. City glow bruised the clouds. Jason said, "This is it." He linked the drive to a weathered switch and primed a timed cascade. Sarah said, "Once it starts, there's no recall." Miles scanned the embankment and froze. He said, "Company." Black SUVs idled beyond the rail fence. A figure stepped forward, calm as a judge. Cole said, "You always were talented." The words cut like glass across the water. Jason felt rage steady his hands. He said, "You taught me to chase truth." Cole's smile never touched his eyes. He said, "Truth belongs to the one who survives." Wind scraped the river like knives while engines idled behind Cole. The narrator watched Jason square his shoulders, a tethered storm ready to break. Cole said, "You have something that belongs to me." Jason said, "Truth belongs to everyone." Sarah caught a tremor in the dark line of SUVs and measured the angles. Miles said, "We can walk away if he gets nothing." Cole smiled with courtroom calm. He said, "You already gave me everything." The words slid under skin like ice. Jason felt the drive's weight grow heavy, as if it knew it was compromised. Sarah whispered, "What did he mean?" Thunder grumbled over steel, and the bridge answered with a shiver. Cole said, "You still don't see it." The night leaned closer, hungry for the next breath. Cole stepped closer, shoes whispering on wet gravel. He said, "You've been bleeding me a map since the bookstore." Jason blinked, confusion flaring into dread. Sarah said, "The safe house was clean." Cole's gaze drifted to Miles like a scalpel finding soft tissue. He said, "Ask your friend about the mirror nodes." The narrator felt the ground tilt as old trust cracked. Miles said, "I kept you alive by feeding crumbs." Jason staggered, rage fighting with shock. Miles said, "He had men on us from hour one." Cole's voice slid like oil. He said, "A partnership really." Jason said, "You sold us out." Miles shook, a lonely lighthouse in a storm of guilt. The river hissed as if it knew the lie's temperature. The narrator tracked the moment a friendship died. Jason said, "How long?" Miles swallowed the night. He said, "Since the power grid fell, he promised to spare you if I cooperated." Sarah stepped between them, voice ablade. She said, "Deals with predators cost blood." Cole lifted a hand, and the mercs lowered rifles a breath. He said, "You love truth, Jason. I love order." Jason heard the old mentor's cadence inside the villain's mask and hated the familiarity. He said, "Order built on silence is rot." Miles said, "I can fix this. Give me the drive." Jason clutched it tighter, feeling the ghost of every name inside it. The bridge clanged like a judge's gavel, and the river kept the count. Sarah moved first, slicing the air with certainty. She said, "He tagged the safe house, not the node." Cole's eyebrow lifted, interest curdling into calculation. Sarah said, "Your mirror net echoes, but it also sings." Jason felt a spark jump the gap between despair and design. He said, "You planted a counterbeacon." Sarah nodded once, the smallest rebellion held in muscle and breath. Miles said, "What did you do?" She said, "I salted his channels with a checksum only public relays accept." Cole's smile straightened into a scar. He said, "You were always wasted on ideals." The narrator heard the hinge of fate catch. Jason said, "We broadcast, and your mirrors choke on their own reflection." Cole's voice went softer, almost kind, and the narrator tasted poison in it. He said, "I built you, Jason. Don't force me to end you." Jason felt memories flash like misfired fireworks, training sessions reframed as grooming. He said, "You built a weapon. I became a witness." Miles looked at the ground, a man measuring the price of breath. He said, "Tell me there's a way back." Sarah kept her eyes on the horizon. She said, "There's only forward." Cole signaled, and the mercs raised rifles in a practiced way. Jason lifted the switch and met his mentor's gaze. He said, "Let the world decide." Somewhere a relay woke, and the night grew teeth. The narrator felt the bridge tense, as if steel could breathe. Jason slammed the switch, and distant relays woke like sirens in a cathedral. Cole said, "Cut them down." Rifles cracked, shredding mist into sparks. Sarah dove behind the node, hands flying across her keyboard. She said, "Handshake seated, redundancy alive." Miles froze between lines of fire and friendship. He said, "Call them off." Cole did not blink. He said, "Finish it." Jason darted from cover, dragging a fiber line through puddled light. Bullets stitched the railing, ringing like bells. The broadcast timer climbed, a heartbeat no bullet could bribe. The city listened. The mercs surged along the catwalk, boots drumming a war rhythm. Jason said, "Hold the mirror jam." Sarah whispered code like a prayer and killed a spoofed root. Cole advanced, coat whispering, a ghost with a ledger. He said, "You leak, you die forgotten." The narrator watched Miles raise his axe and shatter a spotlight, plunging the span into bruised shadow. He said, "They see enough." Muzzle flashes flared like lightning trapped in a cage. Jason slid beneath rail cables and clipped a backup uplink. Sarah said, "Signal jumping to civic nodes." Cole's jaw tightened as if truth had bitten. The bridge groaned, faithful only to gravity. Cole closed the distance, voice soft as velvet rope. He said, "Step away, and I make you a myth." Jason faced him, rain threading his lashes. He said, "Myth is smoke. Evidence is fire." The mentor's hand darted, a blade winking. Steel kissed Jason's ribs and came away red. Sarah cried out, but did not stop typing. She said, "Checksum cascade at 90. Cole pressed harder, eyes bright with manufactured mercy. He said, "I raised you." Jason tasted copper and memory, and chose the living world. He smashed Cole's wrist on the rail, sending the blade skittering. The timer rolled higher, a lighthouse against a black sea. The narrator counted breaths like years. Mercs regrouped, rifles lifting like a tide. Miles stepped into their path, voice raw. He said, "Stand down." They answered with fire, and the night tore. He charged anyway, swinging through light and rain, buying seconds like gold. Jason hauled the wounded breath back into his chest and reconnected a severed line. Sarah said, "Public relays confirm." Mirrors choking. Cole snarled, a mask cracked by consequence. He said, "End them." Miles staggered, then smiled sadly at the truth he finally chose. He said, "Make it count." The narrator felt the bridge carry his courage like thunder through bone. The cascade detonated across the networks, a storm of receipts, routes, and names. Phones lit like constellations on every shore. Sarah said, "It's out." Cole heard the world turn and grew smaller in its echo. He said, "You think survival follows truth?" Jason limped toward him, vision narrowing to a single choice. He said, "Truth survives us." Sirens rose from the city, not hunting, but answering. Miles sank to a knee, breath thin, eyes bright with relief. He said, "Finish it." Cole reached for a pistol, and found only rain. The narrator watched Jason lower his hands instead of hate. He said, "Let them judge." The bridge held. Dawn washed the river in gray, as sirens thinned to a tired hum. The narrator traced the quiet like a bruise across the city's ribs. Jason said, "It's out there now." Sarah sealed the gear, fingers steady at last. Miles leaned on the rail, pale but upright, measuring the day with slow breaths. He said, "They will rewrite the story." Jason answered, "Then we keep receipts." Across the water, phones still glittered like stubborn stars. The bridge no longer felt like gallows, only steel. Sarah said, "Hospitals ask questions. We move." Miles nodded and hid the tremor in his hand. The leak had cost blood, but the silence had cracked. The city listened with new ears. The wind smelled like metal and rain, but also like change. They slipped into a shuttered diner where the power had limped back to life. The narrator watched a waitress light candles for warmth, not romance. Jason said, "We trace every mirror Cole owned." Sarah unfolded a map of nodes like a fresh wound. She said, "Crowd verifications are pouring in." Miles sipped stale coffee and flinched at its bite. He said, "Public outrage rides fast, then forgets." Jason replied, "We anchor it in evidence." Outside, patrols rolled slow, confused by new orders. The screens in the diner looped headlines that did not know how to breathe yet. Sarah said, "Some officials resigned at dawn." Miles stared at the door and chose to stay. He said, "I face what I broke." By noon, the network spat back names with timestamps that cut like chisels. The narrator felt institutions shift on their foundations. Cole sat in custody somewhere with lawyers like walls. Sarah said, "His accounts froze on 3 continents." Jason scrolled through affidavits seeded by the leak. He said, "Witnesses are speaking." Miles tightened his bandage and winced at the price. He said, "I'll testify." Outside, protesters gathered under soaked banners, voices raw and awake. Sirens no longer hunted them, they cleared streets for them. Sarah said, "He taught fear. We teach receipts." Jason nodded and archived each thread like a librarian of fire. The day refused to blink. Evening found them back at the bookstore, lights humming like timid bees. Dust floated in amber shafts through cracked boards. The narrator listened to shelves settle, as if remembering names. Jason said, "He groomed me for obedience." Sarah closed a ledger and met his eyes without flinching. She said, "You chose witness over weapon." Miles touched the brass bell at the counter and smiled without joy. He said, "I chose too late, but I chose." Outside, the street wore a quieter uniform. Jason opened the drive and copied the final cross-checks to public archives. He said, "No single throat holds the truth." The words felt like clean air after smoke. Night returned without thunder, only the hush of a city learning to read. The narrator weighed the cost on 3 faces and found a currency called breath. Jason said, "We go quiet after this." Sarah sealed the last envelope to a journalist who never missed. She said, "Redundancies in 5 countries." Miles locked the door and pocketed nothing that was not his. He said, "I will answer when they call." Jason placed the empty drive on the shelf between forgotten titles. He said, "Legacy is not ownership, it is proof." Outside, a siren passed without teeth. The lights did not flicker. The night finally exhaled. Morning found the city awake to names it had feared to speak. The narrator traced headlines blooming on bus stops and screens. What? Jason walked past them without slowing. He carried quiet like a second skin. Sarah said the prosecutors want a secure brief. Jason said, they want certainty. Sirens drifted like distant weather, no longer a threat, only a reminder. Miles stood at the courthouse steps and breathed through the ache. He said, I will not flinch this time. The narrator felt the ground hold steady for once. Jason said, we did not win. We told the truth. Sarah touched his shoulder, a promise measured in restraint. She said, we will keep telling it. The city exhaled and waited for tomorrow. Inside, the air tasted of paper and judgment. The narrator listened as clocks ticked like metronomes for courage. A clerk read allegations that sounded heavier spoken aloud. Miles said, I helped them hunt us. I will help you stop them. His voice did not break. Jason watched without rescue and learned to trust the cost. Sarah said chain of custody holds across the nodes. A judge asked for proof beyond the spectacle. Jason said, receipts, hashes, affidavits, and witnesses. The words landed like anchors. Outside, chants braided into one long breath. The narrator marked a moment when fear ceded ground to ritual truth. Miles said, let the record reflect my part. At dusk, they visited a riverside wall where names were taped by careful hands. The narrator followed the hush that gathers around remembrance. Jason read each name as if decoding a prayer. He said, they were meant to disappear. Sarah said, they do not. Wind combed the water with patient fingers. Miles placed a small white card and did not sign it. He said, forgiveness is work, not mercy. Jason nodded, carrying the weight without letting it sink him. The skyline flickered and held. Sarah said, legacy is stewardship, not legend. The river remembered the night it grew teeth and did not apologize. The paper rustled like a verdict accepted. Night folded around a holding facility with lights that never blinked. The narrator tracked echoes down a corridor that smelled of bleach and endings. Through glass, Cole waited with a smile built from old habits. He said, you mistook exposure for justice. Jason stood without leaning. He said, justice needs light to breathe. Cole tilted his head, curious even now. He said, you became what I engineered. Sarah said, he became what he chose. Miles did not speak. He watched the man who bent him and felt the shape unbend. Cole said, truth is a currency. It inflates. Jason said, not when we diversify custody. Silence answered like a door closing. Before dawn, the bookstore hummed like a patient machine. The narrator watched Jason stack blank journals where the empty drive had rested. Sarah said, the mirrors are gone. Jason said, they will build new ones. Miles flipped the sign to open and left it there, a small rebellion against hiding. He said, if they come, I answer. The city outside breathed, slow and even. Jason opened a laptop and wrote a single line that any coder could read. He said, audit everything. Sarah smiled, not soft, but sure. She said, we will. The page saved with a quiet click. The legacy settled, not finished, only started.